What's going on, guys? Shooting Dave here. So good to see your faces. Welcome back to the channel. Now, if you're new here and you don't know what I'm about, I'm a car photographer from London, England. I've just moved here to LA and I make videos about car photography and retouching techniques. I also make some videos about moving to a different country and what that might be like. So if that sounds up your street, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. So today we're doing a tutorial inside Lightroom. We're going to take this photo here and then turn it into this one right here. So I'm going to give you a bit of a behind the scenes on why I shot it the way I did, and then we're going to go through some steps inside Lightroom to edit the image. And that way you can help process your own images your own way inside Lightroom. Okay, let's get on to it. Okay, and so here we have the image that we're going to be working on today. I shot this on my Canon 5D Mark III with a Canon 24mm f2.8 IS lens. That's image stabilization, so that helps a little bit with motion tracking shots. So as you can see, I shot this at ISO 100, f13 and 1/20th of a second. I was in another vehicle doing about 20 miles an hour, hanging out of the passenger rear window and shooting towards my dad, who was driving my Dodge Challenger RT. Now, I shot it this way purposely because I have a Canon. Now, for those of you who have a Sony, a Nikon, a Fujifilm, a Potato, anything else, you will know that you have much more dynamic range than I do shooting on a Canon. So that's why it's slightly underexposed, so I can recover some of these highlights. So that's pretty much where I started off working on this image. The first thing I did was it was underexposed and I wanted to maintain these highlights and then work with the rest of the image. So first thing first, I left exposure and contrast as they were. I kind of like the white balance as it was again, so I didn't really want to mess with that too much. So I just came down to the highlights tab and I dropped this down to -35. Now, if you press J on your keyboard, if I take this back to 0, if you press J on your keyboard, you can see that this red area is indicating that it has blown out information. That is useless, we can't use it, so we want to retain some of that. So that's why I dropped it all the way down to -35, so that it all goes away and we can retain some color information in there. Next on to shadows. Now this needed a good healthy boost given that it is an underexposed image to start with, so I pushed this up to 30 again. Now you can see some of these highlights peeking back in there, but don't worry too much about that. It's mainly for the sky that I wanted to keep those highlights in. So moving on, next we're actually going to push those whites a little bit further. I pushed the whites up +20, so quite a bit, but then again this is the sun, so it's going to be bright. Down onto the blacks, sorry, I thought we could drop this down a little bit, so -5 on there. Now I typically just hover over these sliders here and use the up and down arrows on my keyboard so I can make adjustments as such. You can click and drag and slide it around as much as you want, but for me I just find it quicker and easier, especially when I'm doing a batch of images, to go around and just hover over these sliders and use the up and down arrow. Now looking at this image, it is pretty well tack sharp around the front of the car, but I wanted to make sure that this road wasn't really getting too smoothed out by the motion blur, so I actually increased a little bit of texture in there. Didn't go crazy, just +5, and that did it for me. Same with +5 on the clarity as well. And then looking at the image, let's get rid of that. Looking at the image overall, I thought, this is sunset, this is Joshua Tree, this needs to feel more vibrant, so had to push in a bit more vibrance in there, and I put +15 into it. But I didn't want to go into nuclear, especially in some of these highlights on the side of the vehicle, so dropping the saturation down globally as well. So this kind of gives us our flat-ish image to work with. I know it still doesn't look completely the same as the end result, but don't worry, we're going to get there. So one of my favourite retouching tools or colour grading tools inside Lightroom is actually the tone curve. I really like this, I found it massively useful. If you don't know how to use it, drop me a comment below, maybe I'll make a video about it in the future. If not, just go on YouTube, there's plenty of tutorials on how to use curves. So normally what I do here in the RGB section is I'll drop the shadows down a little bit, adding some contrast, and I'll also push the highlights back up again. I know this is kind of undoing the work up here, but if we just turn on and off the curves adjustment, you can see like how much of a difference that kind of makes to the image. It kind of pushes all that contrast back in. And now, a personal preference of mine is to have a little bit of blue in the shadows and slightly warmer highlights. So where it says which channel you're selecting in the tone curve, I drop this down into the blue section right here, and then I like to push up a little bit of blue into the shadows and drop down in the highlights. So this will actually push blue into the shadows and yellow into the highlights, because if you take away blue, the opposite of that is yellow. That's why you get the yellow in the highlights. Now this is a bit heavy-handed, so let's just go in here and give this a little tweak, and that a little tweak, so it doesn't look too super strong. Maybe a little bit more blue. Okay, yeah, that's looking good now. Right, okay, so on and off, just to have a look at that. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the end result on that one. Nice. Okay, so the next thing we need to do, this sky is looking a bit blown out. So back up to the top, ND grad filter here. Now I always like to start mine with minus 2/3 of a stop. So if you hold down shift and then use the up and down arrows, it will actually increase or decrease your exposure by 1/3 of a stop at a time, rather than just dragging it around. I don't know why, I'm weird like that. I like precise numbers. I like to know, because my camera works in thirds of a stop, I like to also work with exposure in thirds of a stop. Most of the time. I do actually break that in a minute and I'll show you. Anyway, so 2/3 of a stop down, and all I did was basically come somewhere mid-range in the sky and then just hold shift and drag a nice gradient all the way down from, well, I don't know, the top 95% of the image down to the roof of the car, and this basically just holds on to some of that highlight information in the sky and helps bring out the blues. The other side of this is the ground is looking very, very heavy, so I wanted to bring some more life into that. So coming just in front of the car here and then lifting up probably until we hit, say, the bumper. Let's actually give us a bit more of an angle like that. So this is going to drop at the exposure, and what we want to do is push it up a little bit more. Turn it on like that. And how are we looking after? Yeah, so there's much more range in there. We've got much more of this golden feel over here. We can see some more into these shadows down here. That's looking pretty nice. I think to finish up with the car, I'm not really super happy with the positioning of it, so I feel like we could probably crop in a little bit here. It's nice to try and keep the driver inside one of these rules of thirds areas here. So I'm just going to bring in the slide until we line up roughly with the driver, and then, oh sorry, let's undo that and keep the original constraint on so it stays 3x2, and just bring it in a bit like that. And now we've got a bit of headspace or ground space to work out whether we want the car to sit higher in frame or lower in frame. And I think there's not much sky detail going on, so I'm probably going to lose some of that sky and bring in more of the road. That way we keep some of this flare. And I love all this like hexagonal bokeh that we got going on here with the dust being kicked up in the evening sun. That's really nice. So yeah, I think that looks good to me. So there we have it. That is the end result. I hope you guys found that useful. That's basically my workflow for pretty much every single photograph I do and edit inside Lightroom. Let me know if you've got any questions. I will of course try and answer as many as I can. And if you aren't already following me on Instagram, it's @ShootingDave. So I hope you liked this video and you found it useful. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and all those other things. And I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.